I just wanted to start by giving a shout out to Jan and to Ed. It's been great working with them, most recently on an event coming up in mid-May that we'll talk more about. It's a small modular nuclear reactor summit at Circle Pine Center in Delton, Michigan, not far from Kalamazoo. We've worked so hard trying to stop what we call the zombie reactor restart at Palisades that there's been little left to resist the small modular nuclear reactors that Holtec International wants to build at Palisades. So this event at the very beautiful and quite historic Circle Pine Center is one of our first concerted efforts on a regional Great Lakes Basin scale to try to push back against not just the Palisades new builds, but also at Big Rock Point, and you name the state around the Great Lakes, the province of Ontario, there are proposals. So just a little bit more about me. Back in 1992, I was on a peace march from New York City to the Nevada nuclear weapons test site. So my first anti-nuclear activism was nuclear weapons related. And we had the joy of seeing full-scale nuclear weapons testing halted in Nevada. That's September 1992, although they've continued testing. In a sense, they used conventional explosives embedded with plutonium, feed the data into supercomputers and advanced nuclear weapons designs. So it's not been a total victory out there. But it was the first time that I heard about the Yucca Mountain dump, because the Yucca Mountain dump on Western Shoshone Indian land is right on the edge of the nuclear weapons test site. So it's an effort by the federal government and the nuclear industry to turn Nevada into a sacrifice area for the rest of the country in terms of nuclear weapons testing, radioactive waste dumping. They have not gotten away with Yucca Mountain. We can talk more about that. When I got back to Kalamazoo after the walk, a gentleman named Mike Martin from Goebbels handed me a flyer on New Year's Eve in Kalamazoo at the festival. Palisades Watch, an affiliate of Don't Waste Michigan. And I've been involved with Don't Waste Michigan ever since. And I'm honored and privileged to now serve as the executive director. So let's get started. I'm also proud of the fact that when we learned that Holtec International was proposing to come in at Palisades to do the decommissioning of the reactor, Don't Waste Michigan and an environmental coalition jumped into that fight because we knew full well that Holtec could not be trusted. We fought Holtec in Utah on a radioactive waste dump. We've been fighting Holtec for a decade in New Mexico on the world's largest nuclear waste dump proposal. So we've learned a thing or two about this company and knew they could not be trusted, not even with the decommissioning, which is itself a very hazardous undertaking, very important to get right if you care about life, health, the environment. And we knew that Holtec could not be trusted to do that. Little did we know in September of 2020, when we jumped against Holtec and were joined by the Attorney General, Dana Nessel, and also Environmental Law and Policy Center out of Chicago, opposing Holtec's takeover, questioning its budgeting and its fiduciary ability to carry out the project of decommissioning. Little did we know what was really up their sleeve. The whole notion of decommissioning was a bait and switch trick. It was a con job. It was a big lie. They were actually planning to restart the closed Palisades reactor, which the previous owner, Entergy, did close for good, or so we thought, on May 20th of 2022. We had a warning. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a month before the closure date on April 20th of 2022, first floated the trial balloon of not closing Palisades. So we knew something wrong was happening. And we would not find out until that September 9th of 2022, when Governor Whitmer and Holtec publicly announced that the decommissioning was off, restart was on. And also in April of that year, Holtec's CEO and founder, Krishna Singh, floated the trial balloon of not decommissioning the Palisades site, cleaning it up, returning it to other usage, but rather building small modular nuclear reactors there, so-called. So we have been at this fight now for 4 solid years. So here's a photo looking eastward from the lake. The township is called Covert, which is a little ironic because they do have a lot of secrets that they try to keep out there. The community immediately to the south of Palisades, sharing not only the name but the fence line, is the Palisades Park Country Club. It's a resort community of 200 cottages. It's 120 years old, and they have suffered. We may have dodged bullets in terms of a meltdown at Palisades thus far anyway, but not everybody has dodged the bullet. The Palisades Park community reports that they have 50 diagnosed thyroid cancers in their community. And that is off the charts crazy because Palisades Park is a part-time residential community during the warm weather months of at most 3,000 people coming in from all over the place, Chicago, other parts of Michigan, and beyond. People are only out there for a few months. So there could well have been incidents at Palisades that have not been documented because thyroid cancer, like at Chernobyl, like at Fukushima, is caused by radioactive iodine isotopes. Iodine-131 is perhaps the most infamous. Iodine-129, cesium isotopes, cesium-134, cesium-137 can also attack the human thyroid gland. So people have suffered from Palisades. And this name, the monster on the beach, is what Palisades Park calls the atomic reactor. They put out a 100-year yearbook for Palisades Park, and they had a whole chapter about Palisades atomic reactor, and they called it the monster on the beach. So a little bit of the history. Palisades was designed in the mid-1960s, 60 plus years ago. Ground was broken on construction in 1967. There was a 4-year construction period. The original owner, then called Consumers Power, actually sued the architect engineer, Bechtel, for shoddy construction and initially sought $300 million in damages. This is pre-operations. $300 million in 1971 was a lot of money. They settled out of court for $13 million, which still in 1971 dollars is a lot of money. And then they fired it up. They didn't fix anything. So one of the claims to infamy at Palisades is that it had one of the worst capacity factors in the entire U.S. nuclear power industry throughout the 1970s and 1980s. This photograph's from 1974. They, some years, only had a 50% capacity factor. So, and again, Jan O'Connell, as we've worked together the past 4 years to oppose the restart, documented incidents that were in early operational phase that were very serious. So Palisades, for all these decades, has put a very large area at significant risk. They had troubled operations all the way through their 51 years of active operations, putting Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes downwind and downstream at risk. And ironically enough, one of the agricultural heartlands of Michigan. And I learned a lot about this from Maynard Kaufman, who was a professor of religion at Western Michigan University, had an organic farm and an intentional community in Bangor, which is within the 10-mile emergency planning zone of Palisades. And I'm always inspired by these stories. Maynard and others opposed Palisades before ground was broken in 1967. They saw through the lies, and he continued to fight Palisades until he passed away in 2021 when we intervened against Holtec coming in to do decommissioning. Maynard, who was in hospice at the time, agreed to yet again provide our environmental coalition with legal standing, given his geographic proximity. And then he passed on just weeks after he did that for us. So, you know, when you've got the father of organic agriculture, as Maynard has been called, on your side, that's really something in Michigan. Ooh, we're having a little trouble with advancing. So I just wanted to fast forward to 2011, 2012. Fukushima happens in March of 2011. And ironically enough, Palisades had a very bad operational phase after Fukushima. And boy, did we pounce. Not that we hadn't been active against Palisades for many decades before that, but they had 5 unplanned shutdowns in a single year. The most serious of all is what this photo is about. This is a shorted electrical circuit board in the control room or next to the control room. An electrician who was working on this box was nearly electrocuted in this incident, and 50% of the control room's power was lost. And what's significant about that, there's lots of significance about that, but one of the most significant parts of that was Palisades also happens to have the most neutron embrittled reactor pressure vessel in the country, and perhaps the world. And so the nightmare scenario with neutron embrittlement of the reactor pressure vessel, it's like a hot glass under cold water, except in a pressurized water reactor. That's at a ton of pressure per square inch on that hot glass under cold water. The cold water is the emergency core cooling system, which nearly activated inadvertently during this incident. And if that had happened, then the embrittlement risks would have been tested in the real world at Palisades. And you really do not want to do that. Worst case scenario, it's called pressurized thermal shock. You can fracture the reactor pressure vessel, which is 8 inches thick steel, through wall. You lose the primary coolant in the core. It turns to steam and escapes the vessel, and you will have a meltdown. The last line of defense is the radiological containment structures, which, as we saw at Fukushima ×3, were either damaged or entirely destroyed by the meltdowns and the explosions that took place. Another claim to infamy at Palisades is that it has had the worst control rod drive mechanism operational experience in industry. The first time they had to shut down because of control rod drive mechanism failures, seal leakage, was in 1972, just 1 year into operations. And this continued for a full 50 years. In fact, the final shutdown, we thought for good at Palisades, was due to the latest control rod drive mechanism seal leakage on May 20th of 2022. The previous owner, Entergy, had planned to shut down Palisades on May 31st of 2022. They had to shut down 11 days early because of this latest incident. And this is an image of how close to the core the workers at Palisades have to work to deal with these control rod drive mechanism seal leaks. In this particular case, I believe it was in 2014, they replaced every single one of the control rod drive mechanism seals. It was a workforce of around 200 workers. Some of them were women of childbearing age. There was an incident report that came out because of the high radiation doses that the entire workforce experienced on this 1 month long job. The average exposure was, I believe it was 2.8 rem per worker. That was an average. That would have violated the international standard for worker radiation exposure. And just to give you an idea how bad radiation health protection in the United States has been for decades, our nuclear workers in the U.S. are allowed to get 5 rem per year, not 2 rem per year, like the international standard. And now, as the introduction indicated, under the Trump administration, we are in nuclear power regulatory freefall at this point, and that includes radiation health protection. They're currently trying to do away with the linear no threshold hypothesis, which has been on the books for many decades, has been affirmed over and over again by the National Academy of Sciences, which holds that there is no exposure to ionizing radioactivity that can be considered safe. There is no threshold below which radiation exposure is safe, and the risks of radiation exposure accumulate over a lifetime. So they're trying to get rid of that now and create a threshold, apparently, below which anything goes. And it's just not true. It's not scientifically based. Another aspect of this incident with the 200 workers was they were not wearing the radiation badges in the proper places, and that could have been intentional. They had them placed on the wrong parts of their body. And so that average of 2.8 rem per worker was probably low ball for some workers. So these are very serious incidents that have happened at Palisades. And I think this is my last slide. The issue that has gotten the most traction thus far during this restart scheme by Holtec is degradation of the steam generator tubes. And all of these problems I've talked about, the reactor pressure vessel embrittlement is a pathway to meltdown. Steam generator tube degradation is a pathway to meltdown. The control rod drive mechanism, seal leakage is a potential pathway to meltdown. The list goes on. And Palisades is the worst or among the worst on all of these issues in the entire U.S. nuclear power industry. So this particular safety risk at Palisades, we knew about in spring of 2006 when Consumers Energy Now, the initial owner of Palisades, held a presentation at the Michigan Public Service Commission and gave a list of the reasons why it wanted to sell Palisades to Entergy. It included the need to replace the steam generators for the second time in Palisades history. The first replacement was in 1991. It also included the reactor pressure vessel embrittlement. They didn't mention the control rod drive mechanisms, and I should have introduced David Lochbaum. His portrait appeared earlier. He wrote the report there. He often involves humor in his work. Headaches at Palisades, broken seals, and failed heels. So he documented that this issue was also very significant at Palisades. But that smoking gun document from spring of 2006, Consumers' presentation to the Michigan Public Service Commission, laid out a half dozen major safety systems at Palisades that needed replacement. Another one was the reactor vessel closure head, the lid on the reactor. This was in the aftermath of the Davis-Besse hole-in-the-head fiasco on the Lake Erie shore near Toledo, the most serious safety incident since the 3 Mile Island Unit 2 meltdown in 1979 in the U.S. So a long list of reasons why. None of those have been repaired or replaced as Consumers said was needed in 2006. Why not? Because the rogue agency, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, never required it. So Entergy, which operated Palisades from 2007 to 2022, never replaced the lid, never dealt with the embrittlement, never replaced the steam generators. Holtec was supposed to come in, demolish the facilities, deal with the radioactive contamination, manage the radioactive waste. They have done as little as possible to fix anything at Palisades because fixing things costs money. And the steam generator issue is a good example of that. We got a hold of a Holtec document, an application for billions of dollars in bailouts to the U.S. Department of Energy, dated July 5th, 2022. We submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the state of Michigan, eventually got a response. And incredibly enough, this document, 42 pages long, from Holtec to the Department of Energy, laying out their restart strategy and requesting billions of dollars to carry it out, was dated 1 week after Holtec took possession of Palisades on June 28th of 2022. So they would not announce for another couple months what their plans were. This was all done in secret. And the price tag, the single largest line item in their restart strategy, was steam generator replacement. $510 million to replace 2 steam generators at Palisades. They have backpedaled. They are not replacing the steam generators. They are attempting repairs on the steam generators. What's really incredible is we've known after that 2006 document, the steam generators have needed replacement now for 20 years. When Holtec took over Palisades, they did not institute what's called wet layup. This is basic chemical preservation of vulnerable systems like the steam generator tubes. They let the water chemistry go to hell for 2 solid years. And the damage done to the steam generator tubes was extensive and significant. So for the past couple of years, they have been attempting repairs, Band-Aid fixes on the steam generators, what they call sleeving, inserting an even thinner diameter tube inside of the damaged tubes, self-inflicted damage by Holtec, which our expert witness, Arnie Gunderson, who has 55 years of nuclear engineering experience, has called a rookie error by a company that has never operated a reactor, has never repaired a reactor. And we are now poised for restart. Our coalition does have a lawsuit in federal court in Western Michigan. We have material for numerous additional lawsuits. We've been engaged in NRC kangaroo court licensing proceedings for 4 solid years now. We've appealed all of the adverse rulings against us to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the 5 directors of the agency, where they have piled up in a logjam. And another interesting point in that 2022 document was Holtec predicted that they could restart Palisades by mid-2024. They are 2 years behind schedule at this point. And the last thing I'll mention is the pocketbook impacts. Follow the money. Holtec has requested more than $8 billion of public money for the restart. They've requested about the same amount for the 2 SMR 300s, small modular reactors, so-called 300 megawatts electric each, which will nearly double the nuclear megawattage on the tiny 432-acre Palisades site. They've also targeted Big Rock Point up north for 1 or more small modular reactor new builds. So a grand total just at the Palisades site itself of more than $16 billion of mostly federal taxpayer, but also state taxpayer and also ratepayer bailout money. Holtec has no skin in the game. This is other people's money that they're playing around with at huge risk to the entire Great Lakes. And I think I'll just end there and turn it over to Mike and look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and I'm sure there will be some. I'm going to introduce Mike to us all. Michael Keegan, our second speaker, a lifelong resident of Monroe, Michigan, where he served for 25 years as a social worker, leading important human services projects. But at the same time, he's been a volunteer leader in opposition to nuclear power and nuclear weapons. He was one of the founders of Don't Waste Michigan, which Kevin is the executive director of now. Michael also helped to found the group Citizens Resistance at Fermi 2. Of course, Monroe is known for the Fermi power plants and the incident where we almost lost Detroit. And he's also one of the founders of the Coalition for a Nuclear-Free Great Lakes. Michael has served as a researcher and technical advisor to coalitions seeking to protect our state from the risks of nuclear power for many years. And I'll turn it over now to Mike.
Well, thank you very much, Fred, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you, Kevin, for a marvelous presentation. Kevin had he showed up at a lecture I was giving in Kalamazoo. I think it was about 1992. And he got hooked and got involved on the anti-nuclear power front. And the student is now the master. And hats off to Kevin. He's changed world history, shutting down Yucca, just most recently shutting down the high-level nuclear waste dumps in Texas and in New Mexico. So hats off to Kevin. I'm a researcher. I'm a social scientist by academic training and got the bachelor's in science, so I am a scientist. And so I do scrutinize stuff, and I am also trained in statistical analysis So I got sociology coming out my ears. So I take that approach, that tool, that set of tools, and I apply it to the nuclear power industry. What I've done is I've been in the research end of it, reviewing public documents that are posted up but are not easily accessible. So I review those for Palisades, and then when I do find something of interest, I check in with nuclear engineers. Um, so I've been working with the Union of Concerned Scientists since about 1982. Bob Pollard was the first one they had in that place. Then I worked with Dave Lockbaum and now with Ed Lyman. But always going to nuclear engineers. I'm a social scientist. I'm a generalist. I can be a research assistant, but I'm not an expert on nuclear power, and nor have I ever claimed. I always go to my experts there. Palisades, as Kevin pointed out, started design in their mid 60s, broke ground in 67, came online in 71, but they came online with a conditional operating license because there was a whole lot of standards they were not meeting that were at the time considered this is standard, what's required of the industry. They were in a conditional operating license phase until 1991. The steam generators, the first set of steam generators, began to fail almost immediately. They limped through the 80s with those and kept getting exemptions and relaxed standards from the NRC to allow the operation of the first steam generators with up to 25% of them plugged and not operational. Well, at that level, it really cuts into the efficiency of the plant. As Kevin pointed out, the capacity factor was terrible. There was about a decade that they operated at 44% capacity. So they limped along. We're not willing to put money into the plant, not do the repairs as they were required. Consumers the steam generators were failing. Consumers Power replaced the steam generators with the exact same steam generators made of Inconel 600. This is an alloy that has been known to be problematic. And so it was not heat tempered. There were a lot of peculiarities to the installation of those steam generators outside of the norm of the industry. And they began to fail. In 2006, the revelation before the Public Service Commission that the steam generators needed to be replaced. As Kevin pointed out, $500 million project just for the equipment. Then you have to be down about 2 years, so you're losing revenue on that front. So all told, probably $2 billion change out would have been required. But no, we think consumers thought we're going to sell it to Entergy. We're going to sell it to a new company who has a fleet of nuclear reactors, has lots of nuclear experience, and can handle heavy situations like that and know what to do. There were, as Kevin pointed out, about 6 items that were $100 million fixes or greater. So consumers was motivated to sell the plant to Entergy. And during this sale, this transaction between 2006 and 2008, Consumers Energy was able to secure a 20-year additional license for the Palisades to run it up to 60 years. So consumers noticed they had a lot of money in the decommissioning trust fund, and that's money that came from the ratepayers, about $800 million. And consumers figured, we don't need all that money in the decommissioning trust fund. Upon the sale, let's figure out a package where we can refund to the ratepayers about $100 million, put it in the pocket of Entergy, the new purchaser, $100 million, and put $100 million in our pocket, which they did. And all with the blessings of Michigan Public Service Commission, all under Jennifer Granholm was the governor at the time. Jennifer Granholm then went on to run for a second term as the governor, and she enlisted Consumers Power executives to run her campaign. She was successful in nailing that second 4 years. That's some of the history. Well, Entergy ran the plant. They didn't do squat. They didn't do the replacements called for. They did the Band-Aid, bubble gum, chicken wire kind of fixes. And fast forward, we're coming up on the plant needs to be shut down because it's just physically, the equipment is worn out. Promises were made before the advisory committee on reactor safeguards that they would change out the entire drain system because it was too small and the sumps got plugged up with debris. They promised they'd do that. They didn't do that. They have a situation there where insulation on equipment, if it comes loose, it will create debris and will clog up the drainage and shut down the circulation, the emergency circulation of Palisades. The NRC allows them to run with an exemption. This was first known in the year 2000. 2001, there was some discussion amongst the NRC. Finally, in 2004, they issued a directive to the industry to change out this insulation. The name of the item is CSI 191, and that's the code for the generic problem at nuclear power plants. But nuclear power plants were supposed to change this out. Palisades never did. So that same threat of literally 5 cubic yards of calcium silicate coming loose, traveling through the system and clogging all the drainage and all the sumps has been known about since the year 2000. So now it is deferred until the second refueling after the restart. Things are falling apart. The plant's dilapidated, and Entergy knows this. They're limping along. They got the sweetheart purchase power agreement with Consumers Energy, who said, well, we'll sell you the plant, and we'll buy back from you all the energy you produce. So it was a 15-year power purchase agreement at a cost 57% above fair market value for overnight power. So it was lucrative for them. It was lucrative for consumers, but it was a terrible, inefficient, very expensive machine. So they're limping up towards the end of the plant, just physically. Seals are failing. Shutdowns are more and more frequent. They put forward in 2018 that they would shut the plant. 2016, that they thought they could shut the plant in 2018. Well, then there was political economy push. No, we want to keep the plant running. So they kept the plant running. More and more Band-Aids on it. They finally shut the plant. They announced they were closing the plant in 2022 in May. At the same time, they're going to sell this plant to Holtec, which is a decommissioning firm. They own several plants across the United States, Indian Point, Oyster Creek, Pilgrim, several others, where they go in and they see this big pot of money that accumulated in the decommissioning trust fund. So the name of the game is to do the work on the down and dirty. If you could save money, that money ends up back in their pocket. Well, at Palisades, they decided 1 month after they took title to the reactor that they were going to restart the reactor. But I want to back up a bit. In the fall of 2021, Todd Allen with the University of Michigan Nuclear Engineering got a letter going with, I think, 153 nuclear engineers signing on saying, oh, we got to keep Palisades going. What a waste it would be to shut down this plant when we could do simple modifications, be up and running, blah, blah. I believe this went to the governor of the state, Gretchen Whitmer, and I think that was motivation for her to start the process of getting Palisades restarted. Now, Jennifer Granholm, once the governor of the state, is now the Secretary of Energy. She's in a position where she could direct Department of Energy money towards Michigan. So the plant got sold under the auspices of decommissioning, terminating. It was fraudulent. It was a transaction which should never have occurred. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission should never have allowed that. It was a bait and switch. And from high school, I think I recall that a bait and switch is criminal behavior. So fast forward, now we've got a reactor which they secretly applied to the DOE to restart, asking for billions of dollars, projecting a mid-2024 restart of the plant, and they haven't got there. They're now 2 years past what their projected date was. In current time, we're reviewing documents that indicates the NRC will not be done signing off on relief request inspections until May. It will be another couple months of testing. Testing without fuel in the reactor had already begun last month. Our nuclear engineer, Arnie Gunderson, indicates that they have run pressure through the system by reheating and pressurizing, utilizing pumps, utilizing a whole lot of electricity coming from off-site. Testing's underway. But what permeates the work at Palisades is a lack of quality assurance. They've lost the quality assurance and they can't regain it. As Entergy was exiting the stage, the former owner, they put into a request into the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Well, since the plant's getting shut down, we'd like to have an exemption where we can eliminate documents that exist. And many of those documents were quality assurance documents. In essence, Entergy hosed down the scene of the crime, got rid of the dirt, figuring the plant's going to be shut. There's not going to be a need for documents going forward. Holtec takes ownership, and the quality assurance is missing. And that's been played out ever since, at every juncture that they attempt to bring it up. This past fall, there was some behavior out at Palisades that was unscrupulous, a little, started with, the first part out about there was glitter on the floor, and they started tracking that down. And there was that incident. We don't talk about it. It wasn't verified in the media, but it was all over Facebook, and it was all over the police radios. A couple of days later, a worker fell into the reactor at Palisades. A couple of days later, there's beer bottles in the security zone at Palisades. A few days later, hydrazine is dumped into Lake Michigan. These are four things that they, kind of interesting, but they're all quality assurance related, indicating that there was no supervision or very lax supervision of the workforce at Palisades. These workers are now on their third run where their work hours have been extended, where there's an exemption that needed to be gotten from the NRC to allow them to work up to 72 hours, up to 86 hours, up to 14 days in a row, and then 3 days off. So you have worker fatigue coupled with lack of quality assurance. Now, the quality assurance, the person falling in the reactor, the beer bottles, the hydrazine, the pole dancers, all that stuff's visible. You see that. But what you don't see is the lack of quality assurance that got embedded into the work that was done by an exhausted workforce. And that's where we're at. The control rod drive mechanisms, many systems that go feed into the reactor were promised in August 1st of 2024. They promised they were going to replace all that. Okay. The last summer they said, we need some relief requests. We need some exemptions, some deferrals of work, and allow us to operate and repair what we have instead of replacing. Well, part of the problem of using what they have is that they cannot substantiate the quality of the welds. There is no quality assurance, no paperwork to go along with the work that had got done. Holtec throws up their hands. Oh, if we could only find it, we'd submit it right away because it'd make it a lot easier for us. But basically, it boils down to the dog ate the homework. That's where we're at with Palisades. And there's a lot of money riding on it. The political economy of it is such that everybody, both sides of the aisle in Michigan and at the federal level, are go gung-ho nuclear. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being thrown their way, and nobody wants to back off. Today, we issued a report authored by Arnie Gunderson, nuclear engineer of 55 years, where he examines the problems with the steam generators, which we have been challenging. And we sent that letter to the restart panel because most recently, the contractor for Holtec, Framatome, has come out with a report that says running the reactor for a full cycle, it will not make a full cycle without failure. And that it will need to be shut down some point during the restart to take a look at the steam generators because they are going to be exponentially failing going forward. That's going to be chronic. Could be very acute, could happen suddenly. Could lead to a loss of coolant accident. But even in the best scenario, the plant is going to become increasingly inefficient and not worth operating. So we have, as Kevin mentioned, we've got 2 appeals before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission themselves. We had to go through all the Administrative Procedure Act to get there. And the NRC Commission will not rule on those because that gives us the opportunity then to go to federal court. Well, we have already gone to federal court. Wally Taylor, an attorney from Iowa, a longtime Sierra Club champion, and Terry Lodge from Toledo, right from the get-go said, this is illegal. They're not allowed to use an exemption to get these license amendment requests. The rule does not allow them to do so. So that's where we're at. They will attempt to restart it. It will be a snap, crackle, pop. It's going to be miserable for them. It's going to be miserable for us. But where is the prudency? So at some point, you got to stop throwing good money after bad. If you find yourself in a hole, first rule order is stop digging the hole deeper. So we can do better, and we've got to do better. And that's about what I have for now. And I thank you for your attention. And I we need your assistance in turning up the political heat to get some eyes and ears on the plant. Holtec has a history of coming in with a big honeymoon period, going to promise you the world, and then it turns to extortion. That is how it has gone in New Jersey, how it's gone in New York, Oyster Creek, Pilgrim. So it's all lovey-dovey until it's not. So with that, back to you, Fred. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Well, thank you, Mike. That was extremely interesting. In addition to everything that we've heard, if you take a look in the chat, Kevin has posted a lot more information, links to a bunch of different articles, including materials that can be found on the don'twastemichigan.org website and the beyondnuclear.org website. And he mentions the work of our own resident Southeast Michigan Sierra Club group nuclear lead activist, Ed McCardle. And Ed asks, and I'm sure he'll want to say something about this himself, but he asked for the two of you, if you would, to give us kind of a short update on Fermi 1, 2, and the so far blocked Fermi 3. Who would like to do that?
Well, that's in my neck of the woods, so I'll take it.
It is. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm in Monroe, and we host a nuclear power facility. The Fermi 1 was a fast breeder reactor. The secret objective, which was confidential, marked secret, was to produce weapons-grade plutonium for bombs. But the public was told, oh, it's going to make more power than it consumes. We've got a blanket wrapped around the core, and as it has a chain reaction, it spins off and makes more fuel. So that's what we were sold on. That is chronicled in the book We Almost Lost Detroit by John G. Fuller. There was a Nike base in Monroe. That's a missile base that was just a couple miles away to protect the Fermi 1. So Fermi 1 had a core meltdown in October 5th, 1966, and chronicled in the book We Almost Lost Detroit. Fortunately, it did not have a full meltdown, but pretty dangerous stuff. And please keep in mind that sodium spontaneously combusts when it hits steam, water, or air. So it could have been a real nasty accident. There was a lot of radiation released. Out near the plant, there was a lot of thyroid cancers. We did have an epidemiologist in 2021, Joe Mangano. He's public health. He found that there are elevated cancer rates in Monroe County. Children 1 to 24 elevated 42% above state average. So these anomalies of cancer rates running right at the same years that the Fermi is operating. In 1985, so soon after the Fermi 1, they began pursuing a Fermi 2. They started excavation in 1969 without a license to do so. Frank Curon, an iron worker, went to D.C. before the Atomic Energy Commission, the predecessor to the NRC, and asked them about the construction going on at Fermi. They said, oh, there's no construction going on. There's nothing. He pulls out the aerial photographs and shows they've been under construction for 2 years. Well, they go ahead and they get a construction license proper, and they begin construction. A very protracted construction that ran through the time when there was an oil embargo of 72. Capital money became very, very tight, and they had to go into construction outage. But before they went into the construction outage, they had to burn 5 trailers of documents. The next party that came on 2 years later had to recreate the documentation based on what was there. And at that point, that's when Furby 2 lost their quality assurance. So fast forward, Furby 2 gets their low power license to operate in March of 2000 and no, in 1985. I'm sorry, 1985. And they're doing low power testing up to 5%. On July 1st and July 2nd, the plant was running. They had a criticality. They did not know it was running. They went to Washington, D.C. They got their full power license in hand. And then the NRC learned a week later that they had this little glitch called a premature criticality. That began a 3-year protracted startup of Furby 2, which had the worst record in the nation for a startup. And they've been making a mess ever since. Right now, Furby 2 is in a outage, refueling outage, which they are telling the workers 40 days. But hearing from the cafeteria workers, there's 3,000 people coming to the plant. It's going to be more than 40 days. We're also getting reports that there's heat exchangers, 6 of them, that have to be switched out. These are huge components. That cable has to be switched out. All those things. The reactor itself is a General Electric Mark I. It is the largest Mark I reactor in the world. There's 5 of them that are the same size. The Fukushima was a Mark I with known problems. It was known that the containment would fail if there was a loss of coolant, a loss of circulation. So it was known. So we have the largest of the worst in Monroe. That's Furby 2. And Furby 3, we stopped it. And much help, I think, to Sierra Club, who helped raise some heat. Several meetings, we pulled together a coalition, Alliance to Halt Furby 3, and we were there challenging at every step. What they thought was going to be a 3.5-year licensing procedure, we dragged it out to 7.5 years, at which point it was recognized that this would be a $20 billion build, and they would have to leverage the company to do it. It was cost prohibitive. So I think Detroit Edison should send us a check every month thanking us for preventing them from going into bankruptcy. And that's my Furby story, and I'm sticking with it.
I'm sure they will too. Let's open it up here and see what other questions we have. You want to raise your hand if you haven't. I don't think we have other questions in the chat at this point.
And Fred, could I just real quick? I wanted to give another shout out to Ed. I just wanted to tell this story. It was another 20-year battle from 2001 to 2021. We stopped essentially Canada's national radioactive waste dump directly east from Malpina, within a mile of the shoreline of Lake Huron at the Bruce Nuclear Generating Station near Kincardine, Ontario, the largest nuclear power plant in the world with 9 reactors by number of reactors. And Ed's role was, we had been a voice in the wilderness for a dozen years, hooting and hollering about this dump, and nobody seemed to care on the U.S. side. And Ed talked to his state senator Hopgood, and that got the ball rolling. In a very short period of time, there was a state Senate hearing, and there was a unanimous bipartisan state Senate resolution against the dump that Ed's work got going. And that led to a bipartisan, bicameral U.S. congressional caucus, not just Michigan, the entire Great Lakes, all 8 states. And it took all of that and so much more to stop that dump. And the final nail in the coffin was the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, whose land Bruce is on, whose reservation is very close by. They turned down essentially a bribe offer of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $1 billion, by a vote of 86% to 14%. They said no to the dump. And Ontario Power Generation had painted itself in a corner. They said, of course, we're going to honor the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation's wishes on this. And then they voted 86% opposed. And we stopped that dump. I put it in the chat. The one problem with all these nuclear waste dump victories is the waste still exists. We got to stop making it. So the latest dump fight in Canada is just beyond the Great Lakes Basin. That was very strategic by the Canadian nuclear industry. They wanted to get rid of this opposition of the Great Lakes Congressional Caucus. It's in a watershed that flows through Minnesota and then out to the Arctic Ocean. It's Ojibwe land. So that fight is very much on. And we've got to help those folks to stop it out there. But thanks. Thank you, Ed. What a tremendous victory.
All right. Charlie?
So I'm really just struggling to understand Holtec's plan. I mean, is it just incompetence that's perpetuated by political inertia? Is it another bait and switch to just launch the small nuclear reactors? Is it are they just trying to float their stock with all this federal and state money? I mean, what's going on there? I don't get it.
Well, let me say quickly that they're playing with other people's money. OPM, and it's very addictive. And Kevin's got a pretty good rap sheet on Holtec, so I'll turn it over to Kevin if he wants to.
Yeah, I mean, everything you mentioned and more, add the corruption and the criminality of Holtec. So Holtec's CEO and founder, Krishna Singh, was implicated in a bribery conviction in Alabama at the Browns Ferry nuclear power plant. Krishna Singh and Holtec offered a Tennessee Valley administration official $55,000 to get their foot in the door on a radioactive waste management contract. The bribe came to light. Holtec's punishment was a 2-month ban and bar from doing business with the Tennessee Valley Authority and a $2 million fine. And they treated it as a cost of doing business. They waited the 2 months, they lost the $2 million, and they carried on with the contract that they had gotten through a bribe. And so fast forward, Holtec applies for a $260 million tax break in New Jersey. On the application form is asked under oath, have you ever been banned and barred from doing business with a federal or state government agency? The TVA is a federal government agency. Holtec's CEO, Krishna Singh, answers under oath, no, we have not ever been banned and barred. They had been. They got busted on the lie through some good investigative reporting. Long story short, they have never returned the money. They used that money to build their corporate headquarters in Camden, New Jersey. And the AG of New Jersey is still trying to claw back that $260 million. This is from many years ago at this point. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. I've got a annotated bibliography. I call it the radioactive skeletons in Holtec's closet. They're involved in so much corruption, not just in the United States, but internationally. At Chernobyl, Ukraine, of all places, they got the radioactive waste management contract and then essentially abandoned their post. And why that was significant, what they were supposed to do was move the high-level radioactive waste from the pools at Chernobyl into dry cask storage, which is a safer configuration. They dragged their feet for years. They removed their entire workforce except for a single person. And then the Russian military invaded, seized Chernobyl. Power was lost to the pools, to the cooling pumps. Luckily, the waste had cooled thermally for 20 years at that point, because otherwise it would have been a matter of hours until the pool water boiled away and the waste caught on fire. So fortunately, that didn't happen because of the long fuse, but there was a fuse and it was burning. And luckily, they got electricity restored before the worst happened. So Holtec is a criminal and a corrupt corporation. And another colleague of ours, Nancy Van in New York, near Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant, literally did a rap sheet on Holtec, all of their misdeeds going back many years. But one thing about Holtec is they will say yes to whatever, no matter how crazy, no matter how risky, so long as they get paid big money. And essentially, that's what's going on at Palisades. A part of that history was when Governor Whitmer on April 20th of 2022 said, hey, why are we closing Palisades? Let's keep operating it. The whole idea was for a more experienced operator to be brought in, an Entergy again, or an Exelon, or a Duke, somebody with a big nuclear fleet and lots of experience and lots of resources. There was no company crazy enough to try to restart Palisades. So the fallback was Holtec will do it. They were supposed to do the decommissioning. They were trying to flip Palisades. No, they're going to restart it with no operating experience, no experience repairing reactors, no experience restarting a closed reactor because it's never been done before. It's unprecedented. They're just crazy enough to undertake anything. And, the risks be damned is their attitude. Yep. And there was a planned initial offering in January of 2026, but all of the problems, many of them self-inflicted by Holtec at Palisades, has postponed that initial public offering. They were hoping to raise $10 billion with a B in private capital. So in the meantime, they have to stick with, I gave how much they'd asked for at Palisades. What they've gotten thus far is $3.52 billion, mostly federal, $300 million from the state of Michigan. That's for both the reactor restart and also the small modular reactor new builds. So 3.5 billion, but they're shooting for 16 billion in public bailouts.
Okay. Well, I have a question, and that is, what do you think those of us who are not ready to run into federal court and file our own lawsuits can do to support the effort to stop the reopening of Palisades?
We need a grassroots groundswell. We need some political heat. We need confronting the legislators who are getting this freeload. They're writing this hyperbole of the nuke and the data centers. It's like the tulip mania of 1637, where they're just, like Alan Greenspan refers to it as irrational exuberance, but they're all on board and they see all dollar signs. They're not seeing the critical analysis of engineers speaking out. It's greed. And Holtec's going to get paid whether it works or not. Holtec's going to roll the dice whether it craps out or not, because they don't have any liability in the game. They are a limited liability company. They are protected by federal taxpayers under the Price-Anderson Act. They have nothing to lose. It's all upside. So they are willing to risk Lake Michigan, wonderful agricultural surrounding area, the people of the state, drinking water for 11 million people. They're willing to roll the dice. And we need to stop them in any way we can and confront. Letters to the editor, the whole actions like Ed had taken to raise the profile of the nuclear waste dump in Canada. We need a political champion, and we don't have any at this time. They're all like too timid to go against the flow. It's all, it's all this hype of this is the thing, this is the place to go. It's good for no greenhouse gases. It's good for the environment. It's not. There are greenhouse gases. It's a heat emitter. It emits vapor, which is 20 times more problematic than CO2. So those kinds of analysis never get to come up, boil up, because the political economy is driving it more and more. I don't know, Kevin. You got
Yeah.
anything? Any suggestions?
Well, I do. That
Yeah.
is, we could talk to our legislators. And of course, we have a lobby day coming up, and we can oppose some of the worst bills and stop any further bills being introduced. I mean, it'll be a heavy lift, but we got to change hearts and minds. I mean, I think present it from a human standpoint. I mean, like, why risk? Why take these risks? I mean, you know, uh, solar panels don't have an evacuation plan. I mean, there's all this, we can provide electricity and power through geothermal, wind and solar, energy efficiency, and we're there. We can regulate data centers so that, they have to create their own electricity and water supplies and so forth. I mean, there's so many things we can do without putting the Great Lakes and the people and the food supply and the fish at risk. So talk to your legislators.
Well, they're not small. Holtec's SMR 300 megawatts electric, that's 4.5 times, nearly 5 times bigger than Fermi Unit 1. We almost lost Detroit in 1966. Ironically enough, Big Rock Point up north was the same size as Fermi 1, 67 megawatts electric. So these SMR 300s are 5 times bigger. And Big Rock Point, maybe I can still get it in the chat, is infamous as a tiny reactor, relatively speaking, compared to, let's say, Palisades, 800 megawatts electric, compared to two 1,000 megawatt electric reactors at Cook, just south of Palisades on Lake Michigan. Big Rock Point, incredibly enough, from 1962 to 1997, released more than 3 million curies of radioactivity into the environment. And it kind of makes sense. It was an experimental reactor. And they broke fuel in the core, including mixed oxide plutonium fuel. And there's a great book called No Immediate Danger, ? By Dr. Rosalie Vertel, who was using a phrase that the nuclear industry uses quite often. If there's a nuclear material transportation accident, and this happened in Southeast Michigan a couple of decades ago, the local police chief, local fire chief goes on TV and says, well, everybody calm down. There's no immediate danger. And the irony and the ghoulishness of that phrase is, yeah, cancer has a latency period. There's no immediate danger. And we're going to stop keeping track after a while. So don't worry about it. So up at Big Rock Point, doctors Gerald and Martha Drake. Gerald Drake was a medical doctor with a private practice in Charlevoix, and he saw a lot of cases of spina bifida coming through his door. And he thought something was wrong with this. And his wife, Martha Drake, was a University of Michigan trained statistician. They looked into it. This is in the 1970s, and they found statistically significant spina bifida in Charlevoix, 4 miles away from Big Rock Point, which had released this huge amount of radioactivity over many years. There's also anecdotal evidence of thyroid pathology around Big Rock Point. So these SMR 300s are 5 times bigger. So imagine what they're capable of. And another aspect of new builds is, let's name some new reactor disasters. Chernobyl Unit 4. Chernobyl had operated for less than a year. 3 Mile Island Unit 2 had operated for less than a year. These are some of the most infamous reactor disasters in world history. So that's the thing, these break-in phase disasters where design flaws get found out the hard way, operator inexperience comes to the fore. You're going to have new build reactors immediately adjacent to an ancient reactor, breakdown phase risks at Palisades. You could have domino effect meltdowns like happened at Fukushima Daiichi. So the small modular reactors have not gone well. The lead project in the country was centered in Idaho, but the electricity was going to be exported to Utah. And the municipalities in Utah who were paying the bills, when the prices started skyrocketing, they jumped ship. And that was called NuScale. a few years ago already, canceled 8 small modular reactors canceled. So this is going to happen again and again unless, taxpayers are paying for it. And that's their approach. Holtec has already got $400 million from the Department of Energy towards their SMR 300s. That's not even going to pay for one of these things. So they are, like I said, they're asking for $7.4 billion just at Palisades, probably. It'll be expended on 2 SMR 300s. But the feds have opened the floodgates on this money. So again, not just at the state level, but at the federal level, we've got to turn Congress around on this stuff. And we've had successes. They're very hard won, but if you work hard enough for long enough, sometimes you win. And there's a lot at stake.
And
Yes, there is.
at Palisades, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
At Palisades, they don't have to have an emergency evacuation plan. It's such a small plant, the radiation will stop at the gate of the fence. And we don't have to have a plan to evacuate people. Now, it's all hypothetical. We have a colleague up in Montreal, Gordon Edwards, who talks about SMR stands for small mythical reactors. They don't exist. They exist to the point where they put forward a proposition to the DOE and get a lot of gravy. But there's literally over 100 different designs of small modular reactors. It's hyperbole. I'm sorry for interrupting. Thank you.
No, that's fine, Mike. Thank you very much. I think we come to the end here. We're just about an hour and a half. I would note that Jan O'Connell put a message in the chat that an article on small modular reactors is coming out this weekend in the Sierra Club's online newsletter. And we'll hopefully get that around people who are on that list, and maybe we can send it out to those who aren't. Jan, did you want to say something?
Well, it's kind of co-written between me and Ed McCardle, so it's from both of us. And it will also be info on, and Mike is the contact person, just so you know, Michael Keegan is the contact person on the summit, which is coming up.
Great.
Kevin, too.
And Circle Pines is a wonderful institution and a great place to go. So it'll be an amazing event, I'm sure.
Yep.
I'd just like to, give a great deal of thanks to Kevin and Mike, also to Ed for all the work he's doing on this and for his comments. Thank you all for coming. We'll have another presentation meeting the first Thursday of next month. So watch for that. This one is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel and so you can get this, get other folks to take a look. And we really appreciate that. Meantime, thanks for coming and good night.